So I just started devouring these comic books while I was at my parents' restaurant.
Hi, and welcome to Josiah is Right. So I am going to jump into it here because I'm excited to have Don Chen with me to do an interview about his background in comics, and we'll talk about. But the way the kind of the reason that I was connected with Don and the focus that I have for another video aside from our interview is I would recognize Don thanks to this particular comic book, which is Zen Intergalactic Ninja. I have that one somewhere in the stack. But this is the first Zen comic that I actually had. Um,
That's
and if
awesome.
you and if you open up the cover there, you see the first not the first person you can read from is actually Don himself, and a little I think he said something like send us your fan mail and you could win contest. I think that this might have been the comic you could have won, a signed version of it. So welcome to Don. Thank you for joining me.
you. It's good to be here, Josiah. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm so
Appreciate
happy to
it.
have you. So, before we jump into that, just give a little bit of a background on give a little bit of a background on your background, give a little bit of a history on sort of just where you come from and how you started into comics.
That's a good question. I grew up in Northern California. It's where I live currently. And from a young age, I started to read. Back in the day, there was a daily newspaper everybody would get, and there was a comic strip section. And so I just kind of weaned myself on just the classic Peanuts and BC, Garfield, etc. So comic strips were kind of my introduction to comics. And then my folks ran an Asian Chinese restaurant when I was growing up, and so I spent a lot of time there alone, just kind of drawing and trying to keep myself occupied. And somehow somebody gave me some comics, and I think they were like Richie Rich and Harvey, kind of age appropriate for a elementary school kid. So I just started devouring these comic books while I was at my parents' restaurant. I just enjoyed them so much, and I just started to kind of draw my own comics on binder paper and with a pencil. And I actually still have those. They're not very good, but they were a start. And as I got older, I just started to find comics either at the local supermarket. There was a Circle K, or just your neighborhood store that would have a spinner rack. And so I think I started collecting when comics were around 35 cents, voraciously. I was like probably in junior high school. So I started to pick up mainly Marvels and DCs. And I just started doing my own comics as I got through high school. And even in junior high school, I was just going down to the local copy shop and running off these little, you take 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and make a few pages and staple it together. You fold it in half. So I had these little mini comics that I was doing. And I was so into it that my high school teacher, he had a cartooning class. His name is Mr. Creighton. And he really mentored me and my friends that were into comics on how to kind of take it to the next level. We actually published comic books my senior year, like in 19, actually, even before that. I graduated in 81, but our first comic book was like in 79. So my parents were gracious enough to help me publish Overload, which was like a fantasy humor magazine. It's like, what if you took Mad Magazine and Heavy Metal and you tried to merge them together? So that's what Overload was. And that's where the high school class was where I met Parsonovich, who was my co-creator on the adolescent radioactive black belt hamsters. And that's kind of what most people know me for, is that parody of the Ninja Turtles. But prior to that, I was in Cracked magazine. It was kind of like a mad magazine, kind of the ugly sister magazine to Mad.
Well,
And
it's funny
so
because
I did.
Cracked, like now, people would know Cracked as the website, like
Right.
and that's kind of died off a bit, but that peaked, maybe 10-ish years ago, the Cracked website. But I remember Cracked as a kid because that would be the one that I would find. I'm like, oh, I guess they don't have Mad. I'll read Cracked.
Right. Right.
I didn't
Yeah.
even really know what it was. I was just like, oh, this is like similar but different.
Yeah. Yeah. It was I mean, to me, it was fun. I mainly bought them because I really like the movie parodies that both Mad and Cracked did. And that was my ambition. Like when I read Cracked, I said, I really want to write for these guys. And my goal would be like to be the guy that writes the movie parodies. So I submitted things, and they weren't quite, as polished as I think they were looking for. But somebody at Cracked saw my work and he said, I think this kid has promise. So I think I got published in 1984 in Cracked, which was pretty, I was just counting in my head how old I was back then. So, I was in my early 20s getting published in a national publication. So that was exciting. So I just kind of tried to sell my skills to different companies. I had rejection letters, from DC and Marvel and everybody else. When you're a kid, you kind of think you can do anything, but when you look back at what you sent in, you go, "Oh my gosh, why did I send that in?"
No,
It was so bad.
It's funny just hearing you talk about like my first ambition was to be a comic book artist and writer, and I'm mainly a writer because through the years I finally learned like, oh, my skill as an artist is not what it should be, or what like
Just
people
like
that I would
me.
see, not even close. And I never submitted, like I never got that far, but the closest for me was at the time in the early 90s when I was a kid, Wizard, which is sort of how I
Oh yeah,
learned about people like you and stuff, and how I found a lot of like that was the first time that I that in my world you could like learn about and connect to the comic book creators, and they weren't just like names in the comics. They were like there was interviews and so on.
right.
But I sent in, a Wizard did a thing where you would draw on an envelope and send it in, and I remember I sent it in, and even as I was doing it, and I was still a kid, I thought, yeah, this isn't even close. I literally knew, I'm like, this isn't even close to the level of quality that they publish. And I think that was like the point where I'm like, okay, maybe just shift to the writing side and get really good at that, hopefully, and
Yeah, good
let
for
more
you.
talented people work on the art. But um
Yeah, I
it's
agree. I like to draw, and I did, I have had some things that I've done published, but I'm not nearly as good as the guys um, that I work with over the years. And there's been a lot of people that are famous that kind of got their start with our company, and it's just I think about them, and it's just amazing. Like Sam Keith is one of the guys that started with me on the Hamsters, and then he went on to do Sandman and the Max, which
No, yeah,
everybody
the Max,
kind of
which
knows.
was a huge, that was I didn't know Sam Keith before that, but visually that was one of those things where very few comics I remember that's like, this is like nothing else I've ever seen. Like the visual style, the
Exactly.
power of that art.
Very
Super
organic, detailed. I mean, almost like to me, I like Bernie Wrightson a lot, and so when I see Sam Keith is kind of more like a Bisley, Bisley meets Wrightson, but with just those muscles and all the tendons and stuff that he does. It's just it's so cool. And Sam was super easy to work with, super chill. But yeah, so Josiah, that's mainly how I got started. Was the Hamsters was my kind of my claim to fame. Um, it sold well. We did like about 20 issues with Eclipse, and then Dynamite Comics bought the rights to them, and so they did a mini series, I think, like in 2007. So after that, I was doing some other projects with Eclipse, like in the 80s, after the Hamsters kind of ran their course, and not not very long, like in the late 80s, they started to have some financial problems. So after we kind of saw the writing on the wall, my friend Bill Mouse and I, who worked on a parody called X Farce,
which is
we
one I
decided to make
actually
our. Oh,
do
yeah, you
have.
go. That's
Yeah,
it.
so I
Yeah,
have
that
that
one sold
because
like.
what's funny. I was interested, like that you mentioned it. I literally didn't notice it until today. I'm like, oh, this is published by Eclipse. I didn't realize that it was, because I knew Eclipse from, and I happen to have, this is the only one I have on hand. But like Scorpio
Oh
Rose,
yeah,
these different Eclipse books that I would find sort of after the fact in the early 90s, like because I wasn't reading them like in the 80s when they were published. I was like finding them later. So
yeah.
this one was like one of the I guess one of the later Eclipse books, I realize now.
Yeah, that was like that's actually probably out of all the books that I've done, probably the best selling single issue. And I think it sold like 70 to 80,000 copies back in the day, which is a lot for a black and white parody by a couple of newcomers. But that was the very first book Bill Mouse and I ever worked on. And Bill, obviously, as you know, went on to do a lot of then books for Entity Comics. And, he's still doing stuff today with his character Nera X, which made her debut in Zen. I think she was in the very last page of Zen Zero. And then Zen #1, she kind of teams up
Okay,
with
yeah.
Zen. So Nera is still going strong and Zen is still going strong. And I think the plan is that Bill is going to team up again with Steve on some kind of new Zen project. I don't know what that is yet, but he's kind of mentioned that to me. So Bill and I launched Parody Press along with my wife and his wife, and that was like in the early 90s. And we just continued to do spoofs of anything that was, popular in the day. And then that got really big, and we decided, maybe we should branch out and do like more mainstream stuff. And I was racking my brain to think of how did we ever meet Steve? How did that Zen connection happen? And I can't exactly remember, but Steve may remember. But it was either he came to us and approached us at a con, maybe, and he was looking for a publisher, or you probably know this because you're a Zen fanatic, but it was licensed by Surge, which was the same company that made the Ninja Turtles, worldwide marketing phenomenon. So I had reached out to Surge because I had the hamsters, but it wasn't a right fit for them. But we did get some licensing deals. In fact, that little thing up behind me is it's a sleeping bag prototype, which I've had like since the 90s. It's the
Oh,
only one that
cool.
they ever did. And so the plan was like, maybe we could ride on the coattails of the Ninja Turtles, not just in the comics, but maybe someone will want to do like sleeping bags and toys and stuff. But unfortunately, it didn't take off. We had a licensing deal to do an animated series with Rankin Bass. But at the time, Rankin Bass was also starting to have financial difficulties. So it just laid there in limbo. I think they bought like a 5-year option to do the hamsters. And then after like the first year, they went kind of dormant and they didn't do anything. So we kind of lost that momentum to get the hamsters like into the public eye with an animated series or something. And normally a toy company won't take a chance on you unless you have kind of like a comic book and a TV show established. So we just had this cult following of the hamsters, mainly from the comic book readers for quite a while. And I still get people writing me and asking me if I'm the guy that did the hamsters because they still come across them, which is cool. So anyways, we just had this, it was just really good timing. Steve came to us with this already published idea. He had done it himself, with self-publishing then. And then it was an Archie series. And they kind of watered down the Archie series. That was, more like a kiddie version, all ages version of Archie for Zen, for Archie. And Steve came to us and said, I really want to make Zen more gritty and more, more action, kind of like when McFarlane was starting to come into his own. A lot of people were kind of emulating Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man and Spawn. And so Steve came to us and said, I'd like to partner with you guys. You already have your publishing arm set up, and I'd like to write Zen and co-edit and publish it with you. And so we just did that issue, the one that you see that you have in your hands, which was Zen #0. And we took a chance and it sold really well. Steve said, let's try to get, you have the direct market version, which has no UPC code. So like, I think 0, 1, and 2, you
And
can see
then
there's
the
there's
others, the
that's
Chrome
Zen
Zero.
Zero. Yeah. Zen
Yeah.
Zero color. So these, we had a direct market version and a direct newsstand version. So we had to do the barcode. And so we were actually on spinner racks all across the country. We had to kind of publish thousands of issues in advance and then send them to a distribution center. And so they would just kind of put them all over the United States. So Zen was one of the few kind of independent comics, I think, back in that day that actually had, newsstand distribution, which was kind of fun. But you don't really make a whole lot of money in that because it's kind of like on a trust system. You kind of have to believe that what they sold is what they're going to pay you for, and they don't return the unsold copies. So that to me is kind of a rolling the dice. So we just kind of gravitated more towards selling directly to the comic book stores after that.
Yeah, I think that, well, that's kind of like, reflective of like a lot of the shifts. And if you look at the history of comic book publishing, that's, the way kind of even with the bigger companies, right? Like that's
Right.
when, I remember myself being a kid in the 90s, like you talked about the spinner racks. I would go to the grocery store as in the early 90s and get my comic books there, and by the mid 90s I couldn't do that anymore.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was, I would go to the comic book store, and kind of that's where, even for the the big Marvel and DC stuff, it was just the shift in the way that they were distributed and sold that I look back on it and I can see what's happening, but as a kid I'm like, hey, why can't I buy this when I buy when my mom's getting our groceries? And
So how did you were you like more of a Marvel person or DC or both
I
or
would say a kid like Marvel and DC, mostly Marvel. And I always say, like, as for whatever reason, as particularly as a kid, the Marvel, maybe it's because Marvel doesn't have Gotham City, and Marvel, there's a handful of issues of Spider-Man I remember that was a big deal that were set in Pittsburgh. And then in the mid 90s, Jim Shooter was, the head of Marvel. So when they did the new universe thing, a big part of that is set in Pittsburgh. Like a big part of that story was set in Pittsburgh. So I'm like one of the few people in the world who's like a fan of the new universe because it happens in
ah
Pittsburgh. And even and that was like supposed to be like sort of that was the very like 80s sort of response to what DC was doing with Watchmen and stuff, where it's like, let's make it real, make it more real. And the character Starbrand, I believe it was him, his character in the comics was a cameraman for KDK News in Pittsburgh, which is a real news station in Pittsburgh. And I found online there was an KDK took out an ad in Variety saying Marvel has a new character that features our station. Like that was like how big a deal, but it was like these comics that then no one read, and then
right.
but then I was able to find them for like 25 cents each in the early 90s. So not a
Yeah.
no complaints for me.
I'm thinking of
But
them because it's funny, Josiah, you mentioned that because I didn't mention this, but I ran a comic book store when I was in high school and also through my early years of college. But then when the hamsters took off, I decided to jump fully into publishing and writing. So I left the comic book store, but I ran it for, gosh, like 4 or 5 years. And it started in my parents' house, like in a little playroom that I'd set up. And before too long, it got so big, I moved it downtown in my city. And I bought all those comic books like you're talking about, the new universe. There was like Kickers Inc. and
yeah,
Star Brand, and I can't remember some of the others,
I
but they
can't remember.
were,
Yeah, like I have bunches of them, but I just can't. Yeah, the titles. Like, that's, which I guess is unfortunately the problem.
yeah, exactly. I don't, yeah, it's, it was ambitious. Shooter was very, he's a risk taker. I actually respect him. And I remember getting rejection letters from him too. So it's okay.
I mean, well, he was like that. His story was like, he started when he was like, like 12 or
A
something,
teen,
right?
yeah,
For
a
DC,
teenager.
something crazy. Yeah. And I guess that's also what, knowing that story, thanks to like Wizard years later, that made, the comic book market and world feel somewhat accessible to me. Cause it's like, I'm from there. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And
that's
like,
cool.
that's why, like, I always joke, being from Pittsburgh, I don't like horror movies in general. I just never have. Like as an adult, I'm fine with it, but as a kid, I would not watch anything. In the 80s, Chucky, Freddy, Jason, those were the big movies that my friends all wanted to watch when they were little kids. I wouldn't watch any of them. But I have no problem watching zombies because those zombie movies are made in Pittsburgh. And somehow there's like, it's like, oh, those ones are okay because I know it's just this weird disconnect, but it's somehow just in my kid brain. That's the leaps in logic that I would go to
Yeah.
make it. But I guess it just, again, saying that, it made it feel accessible. But getting back to the original question about sort of what I read, it was largely Marvel because I guess it had that feeling that DC sometimes lacked, where this is happening in your world.
Right.
Like
That's
that's
true.
why it just felt connected. Like I loved, especially like for DC, I loved Batman and Green Lantern in particular, so I'd read them a lot, but I wouldn't read as much like random obscure stuff. With Marvel, I would read anything because it felt connected to each other in the world, which I think part of why the movies are working as a sort of interconnected thing, and maybe even why DC is not having quite the success. We just had this weekend Flash bombed quite unexpectedly for them. or maybe
Hmm.
unexpectedly. I don't know. There's a whole lot of reasons for it to fail, but there's also a lot of reasons for it could have succeeded. But point being, I feel like that people don't talk about is the fact that Marvel's always been grounded in a connectedness and a reality that DC never has. And that's what's great about DC in a different way, but Marvel's always had that. And as a kid, that's what I gravitated to. So
That's a good observation. I
so
never really put that together and why I kind of felt more led to Marvel, but the way that you stated it, I definitely agree that it felt more accessible and like more of a cohesive, real time world, not more like a you know DC universe. To me, it was cool, but I never felt like I was really in it. It was, but Marvel's, yeah, I do agree.
yeah, and that's I guess that's why, because there's like, even when you have, your character, the people always will cite with DC the relatable character is Batman, but then there's this disconnect because he's, a billionaire, millionaire, whatever, however much money he has, it's definitely more than you have. So it's like,
Right,
oh, even though
true.
he's just the regular guy, there's still something that I don't have that he does. So
Yeah,
um,
gotcha.
so jumping back a little bit. So you said you found, I didn't realize you started Entity with Bill Mouse. How did you guys then, like, how did you meet him to then end up
Oh, okay. Um,
collaborating?
so, well, you have the comic book in your hand. So, after Hamsters had kind of done their thing, we finished like after issue 9. Um, I was thinking, well, what else can I spoof? And so at that time, X Force by Rob Liefeld was kind of breaking all sorts of records. They had like multiple covers, and so Rob was just kind of becoming a big superstar back in the day. And I had heard that X Force was gonna, break a lot of records. So I thought, well, I like X-Men. I think I could spoof X Force and kind of the X-Men universe. So I proposed X Farce to Eclipse, like a little synopsis. And they said, yeah, I think we have a couple of artists that we could assign to that job. So Bill and his friend Bob, they were both those guys that when you go to SeaWorld or to an amusement park are the ones that are doing the characters of you that you pay 20 or 30 bucks for. And so he was doing that down at SeaWorld, and they had a friend that was an editor at Eclipse at the time. And I think they kind of sent her some submissions of their work. And it just so happened that she said, I want to pair Bill and Bob with you on X Farce. And so we did. And that was the very first collaboration. It was just by chance. And at that time, Bill was more like the understudy, and Bob was going to be the primary artist
Okay.
on it. But I think Bob got kind of overwhelmed and he couldn't really handle the pace of it. So Bill kind of stepped in and I think did the lion's share of most of the work on X Force. And so we kind of hit it off, and then we met each other at conventions and on the phone. And um, after Eclipse folded, we said I said I have more X-Men spoofs in my head, so why don't we try this new company called Parody Press? And so that was like in 90, I think 1991. Josiah, we launched Parody Press, and we did a X-Men spoof with 3 different covers called the Unfunny X-Cons. And then after that, Image Comics kind of came on the scene. They had Spawn and Savage Dragon, Youngblood, and we just said, "Oh, this is right for us to spoof." So we did, you know, uh, instead of Spawn, it was Yawn. He has narcolepsy. We had instead of Youngblood, there was Old Blood. They were just a bunch of senior citizens with superpowers, and so we just did all these stupid parodies, and they sold really well.
And just
They
like, yeah,
sold
in the
great.
back of, and
Yeah,
it's funny. I remember as a kid seeing all these, and in retrospect, I realized I don't know why I didn't order any from here. I would find occasionally some here or there in the comic shops, but I realized, like, oh my gosh, like I'm looking at this as an adult and I'm like, kid me probably didn't even notice. Oh, I could have like ordered it.
you
Like,
could have.
just
Yeah,
like it,
back in the
like
day.
I wasn't smart enough to read the bottom, because in my brain I'm like, that's, I don't need to know that. But yeah, like that was
Yeah, we were amassing quite the back order kind of mail order business. And Bill was he's really fast. So I really like working with Bill because he's really good at deadlines, but on top of that, he would do like 2 or 3 issues a month. Josiah, he's just prolifically fast on these parodies. And after a while, we just thought, well, maybe we should branch out. So we launched this new Entity Comics division, which was going to be more of the serious stuff. So that's why you don't see Zen under Parody Press, except for a couple of, we did like an April Fool's special that was a Parody Press, and I think we did Ren Intergalactic Chihuahua. That was like a flip side of the April Fool's special. That was pretty funny because I liked Ren and Stimpy back in the day. So anyways, Entity kind of took off, and we did hi there. Your daughter's so cute.
Are you trying to get some crayons?
No, I'm getting some toys.
Okay, go ahead. This is also the office slash toy room. So Penny is just
you're very organized. I feel like I needed to tidy up a little bit. This is like my extra bedroom where I have my computer. I'm a realtor by day, so I mainly come in this room and do my real estate stuff. But every once in a while, people want to interview me, and I have another studio set up downstairs, but my flat screen TV behind me is not set up for my kind of my techno background. So I just decided to keep it low key today.
No, just for that hamster's hanging the prototype of the sleeping bag, that's all you need as your background. Yeah, well, it's funny because this is our office, but I actually shoot any of my videos in the garage, which has the same color yellow here, but it's decorated differently. In our old house, the office was where I shot my videos, but we have a big garage now that we don't really park the cars in here because we're in Huntington Beach. So that's where my setup is. And the funny thing is I only tend to use this I teach writing. So I teach composition. So when I'm teaching via Zoom, so when I teach, or if I do like interviews like this.
So Josiah, how did you wind up from Pennsylvania to like Southern California?
I went to USC. So I transferred. I actually went to Penn State for the first 2 years and then transferred to USC. So that's what brought me out here.
I'm so envious of you because I'm putting this together, but you've got a lot of Star Wars memorabilia behind you. And George Lucas was like my idol growing up. I used to make movies like when I was a kid. My parents were pretty well off, so they actually bought me a Super 8 camera that had color and sound, but back in the 70s.
Cool. Yeah, that's
so I was doing movies with my friends, and I did like this Star Wars parody, and it was just really fun. You probably saw Hardware Wars, right?
Yeah.
Back in okay. So I kind of have that sensibility, just kind of that goofy Mad Magazine type of take. But my goal in life was to become a filmmaker. And so I actually applied to USC and I got rejected. So I stayed here locally, and I went to Humboldt State, which is now Cal Poly Humboldt. So I went into that thinking I was going to become a movie maker. And then I kind of got disenfranchised because all the actors were super eccentric and weird. They weren't like my buddies that I was making my high school movies with. So I changed my career and I went into journalism, but with an emphasis. They didn't really have a comic book, degree. So I just went into what I thought would be practical. So I went into journalism, but it was more like I wanted to do cartooning, like either political cartooning or something that was fun, not just 9 to 5 news reporting. That's not what I wanted to do. So that's kind of how I got into writing comics. But USC was where George Lucas went, right?
Yes, yeah, and that's what that was the draw for me as a kid. I went to USC and my undergrad degree was in history, so I got accepted in the USC, but I didn't get accepted in the film school, which was my goal as well, to go to USC film school. But I never. That was like I always say there's a little bit of a bittersweetness where I kind of almost achieved my dream in that regard, but didn't. Because I got to take film classes at USC. I took a class on George Lucas at USC, actually. And
nice.
So I remember that that was like a fulfillment of a dream, but yet I didn't get to fully do it. But then after my undergrad, I did go back to grad school, and I have a master's. My master's is from SC as well in screenwriting. So that's kind of my background
Awesome,
as a writer. And because
dude.
I teach composition and I'm a creative writer, and that's sort of what it is. And I have, I'm like the most disconnected person in Hollywood, but that's still like, I
Yeah,
say I'm on the far
I saw your
periphery of the
post.
industry, but at least I'm somewhere there. I know some people from a distance, but yeah.
Yeah, I saw that you had some scripts and that you're working on stuff, and that's awesome. It takes a lot of discipline to pound out a screenplay. I've worked on some, and I've never done it to completion, but it's a it's kind of similar to comics, but in ways it's not. The
Mhm.
way you have to be a lot more precise about the way that you write a screenplay. Because sometimes people with comics, they'll do Marvel style and they'll just kind of give you a synopsis, and then you can have the artist kind of interpret it. And then there's some people that like their scripts laid out panel by panel. So I've done both. I'm comfortable with both, but
Mhm.
screenwriting, you have to. The only way I learned was just by buying screenplays or finding them at a con. Like I think there was an X-Men screenplay that from the Bryan Singer movie. I used to go to San Diego Con, and every once in a while you come across a script uh, for a major motion picture, and so to me that was the best kind of template to look at to write a screenplay. I never went to like a class where they taught screenplay writing. I just kind of emulated what I had read.
Yeah.
Just visually.
Whenever I was learning it, it was funny that there's different takes on it, but one of my best writing teachers who actually didn't teach me screenwriting, Sid Stiebel, he taught me like just prose writing, and I've gotten a lot of like he was kind of my mentor in school. He just actually passed away within the last few
Oh,
years, but he was he was in his 90s by then. So but he was friends with Ray Bradbury for many years, and he would talk about like something that he learned from Ray was like that screenwriting is very technical, but it's also like writing poetry, and it's this balance of technical and poetry because you want to like say as much as you can with as few words as possible that can
mm,
then sort of instruct someone else to do. So he's like, one of the things they would say, you never, unless you're like, you're directing this thing, you never write camera direction or anything like that in the script, but you have to be a good enough writer to infer camera direction and those kind of things so that you're hopefully guiding whoever then is going
wow,
to make this thing later. And those kind of like were the pointers that were sort of his next level stuff. But yeah, I got to meet Ray Bradbury through Sid when I was in
that's
grad school,
awesome.
so that was a highlight for me.
Did
Um,
uh did George Lucas ever make an appearance at your
he
George
came
Lucas
to the class, so
appreciation?
the George Lucas
Wow.
class. He basically what it was is a class that chronicled. It was cool because it was really like a precursor to even what I do on YouTube, which is like pop culture stuff. And the class is a sophisticated version of that where it's analyzing his movies and then the influences on his movies and then the movies that he influenced. So we watched, um, the Seven Samurai, and then we watched like each of the Star Wars movies. And at the time, the prequels were like sort of in the midst of coming out when I was in college. So like, we might have watched the first one, and I don't even know if the other two were out yet by the time I was at SC. I can't remember the years, but those were like coming out at that time. So we watched the original his original trilogy, and then we'd watch like the movies that inspired it, and then we'd watch like maybe a Harry Potter movie and sort of like connecting the threads and then analyzing where these things came from, and then like the influences on George Lucas as a filmmaker and a creator. So it was really cool to like see how those things tied together and where all this stuff came from. So then on the last day of the class, he came and basically did a Q&A with us.
Oh wow.
So it was pretty cool. It's a big class, so it wasn't like small because it was like one that filled up a theater. And it was really funny because it was one of those classes where every single class, that theater was like half full, except for the day George Lucas shows up where there's not a seat available in
Oh
the
yeah.
place. So
Did you get to was there any time to get a like an autograph or anything from him or
no, they didn't. They ushered
yeah?
him off right away, and I think that
Uh
was one of the disappointing things, especially for like the students, like those of us who like were dedicated to the class and were there every time. And yeah, that didn't happen. I did save for a really long time. They gave you a ticket, which was just a printed out piece of paper that said you were in the class so that you could come and give it to them. Because I realized the reason it was so full is then from the university's point of view, it's like, this is a big deal. George Lucas is here. So they'd give it to like, you know, important people at the school so that they could be there to meet, and those people get to meet George Lucas, but not us students. So
like the VIP ticket.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I'm back
cool
here in
though,
the student section, but it was a really cool thing. And it was really cool to hear his, his responses and insights to the questions and things that some of the students had. So
did anyone say, why did you make Howard the Duck?
I think we did watch that in class. I'm not sure if we watched Howard the Duck, but we definitely watched that movie, The Tucker, The Man in His Dream, and it sort of talked about why that failed and why, well, like, that was just an interesting kind of conversation. It was, it's been a long time, but it was cool to, examine that in that way. I don't know if we watched Howard the Duck, but I think it was brought up in that conversation. At the same time, though, it's like, thinking about the execution of Howard the Duck, but the boldness to decide I'm going to make a Howard the Duck movie. That part of it, like, I think deserves credit. In terms of the execution,
I love I love the Marvel comic book, and I was so excited. And I think there was one San Diego Comic-Con me and my Eclipse buddies were going to, and Howard the Duck was premiering that weekend. So we're all excited because we're all big Howard the Duck fans. So we go to the premiere of the show, and it's only like a 10th full, and we watched the movie and we went, oh. it was okay, but it wasn't like when you have set the bar with Star Wars, you just kind of think, oh, this is going to be great. And I think it's funny how they still kind of give homage to Howard the Duck. Like, I think he was in the, like, at the back of one of the Guardians of the Galaxies movies. Like, he was like one of the collectors' prized possessions still in a cage or something. Did you catch that?
Yeah. And then he's like, and at the very, like, in the post-credit sequence, he's like sitting, like, having a drink. And he's actually in the third one. There's, like, I think a scene where, like, some of these, like, there's some characters like playing a card game, and he's one of the characters in that card game too. So he has, like, it's just like, I can't remember how it's used. Yeah, but it cuts back to them a few times where they're just talking or something, and it's like, as other things are happening, it's just like that one of the things they kind of cut to, that he's in that as well. And I don't know if he's in the second one, but I know I just, having more recently seen the third one, to remember that. So
I wouldn't be surprised, with the Disney Channel doing all the Marvel series. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought him back in some way, shape, or form.
No, absolutely. It's like, you have, with the streaming world, there's always like, we need more content, and that's something that would, in some, especially some animated form, it'd be perfect. Yeah, for me, though, it was funny. Like, I saw the movie before I even knew Howard the Duck was a comic. And then I read the comics later. I'm like, whoa, these are so much better. Because I read, I think I discovered him because of Man-Thing comics.
Okay,
but it was, these are all comics that were from like the 70s that I'm discovering in the mid 90s, well after that movie has come out. And I'm like, oh, wow, these are great. This is such a weird, interesting character. It's so different than what that movie was. I had no idea, because you had your frame of reference being the movie. It's like, oh, these comics are really cool. So
yeah, Howard the Duck, and I think Man-Thing was his first appearance. Like, there was some annual or giant size Man-Thing that you put him in. I'm not supposed to say that. Excuse me.
Well, I heard that wasn't the story. I heard that, like, Stan Lee came up with the name, and he, like, pitched it to I'm not sure who created Man-Thing, like, in terms of like came up with the concept, but it was Stan Lee's name, where he's like, we're gonna have a Man-Thing, and they're like sort of looking at each other like, really, Stan? Like, I can't think of maybe it was Len Wein or something. I can't remember who it was, but basically, when they're like, when Stan like came up with that name, they're just like, I'm not going to say anything. We're going to see how far this goes.
yeah, and he's still around to this day. Cool character.
And I
like anything swampy, and I read Man-Thing, and wasn't like if you exuded fear, you would burn.
Yeah.
Around him.
No, it was another one of those things where, when you actually like get into the lore of the comic, it's like, whoa, this is rather intense and can be profound, but then also like fun and silly in a way that comic books can achieve better than a lot of other mediums, where you can balance those things out really well. So
Cool. We're on a whole bunch of different topics today,
that's fun. No, just like I just enjoy, yeah, to talk about comic books and movies. That's my everyday life, and it's just now it's with my daughters, explaining to them why they should like what comic books and movies they should like. So it's, and my older daughter's just at that age where she can kind of start to like process and understand things. Like we went and saw the new Spider-Verse movie, and it
I
was
just saw that
cool.
last weekend.
Yeah,
I
it was
liked it.
cool. It was cool. Yes, we it was fun, especially something we can actually take the kids to, because they're not quite ready for like certain other, even like just the Marvel stuff. It's like it's a little bit too grown up for them, but it's cool to be able to like have her hear her as a 6-year-old sort of like connect the dots and like why this happens and that and what that means and how the character is different in this version and then that, for like just those kind of cool things that just open my eyes up in new ways. So
Did you see I haven't seen the first one, so I only went to see the second one with my grandson. He's like
oh no, yeah,
15.
I've seen it because again, my daughter found it, like, well, like I think I might have seen it before she was like able to watch it, but she gosh, I guess it came out when she was small, the first one, like a few years ago, but after the fact, like just streaming or something, we saw it, and so we've seen, like, she's watched that one over and over again. There was a point where like that was like turn that movie on for her kind of thing, and she would watch that. So yeah, we've seen it. The first one's
People have
actually
told me
the first one's probably a better movie. Actually, it's
that's what
really,
people
really,
told me.
really. It's like really a great movie. Like the second one, in part because it's obviously like half a movie. It's like there's like wait until they do the next one in a year or two. So
Right.
and coming out of the theater, that was the one thing I'm explaining to my daughters. I'm like, okay, guys, you're gonna have to wait now to know
Yeah.
what
I,
happens.
I enjoyed it. I mean, I actually wasn't familiar with that type of kind of freestyle. It's almost like animation on acid because it's got so many different styles. Because you're usually used to either like the straight Disney cell or the Pixar kind
Yeah,
of computer animated. But this movie, to me, from the get go, every 5 minutes you'd have some kind of different style, and it was just really, and it just kept me engaged. Although I did think it was maybe about 20, 30 minutes too long. Just seemed like there's a little, maybe not as much fighting needed, between the beginning and the end. But it was still good. I mean, I watched it on like a bargain matinee, and I didn't know what to expect. My grandson said, "I think you'll really like it." And he goes, "Either that, or you can watch Fast X." And I said, "Well, I know I've never watched any of the Fast movies, so I think I would probably, like Spider-Verse more." So we wound up going to it. And
yeah. I
it
haven't
was,
seen Fast X. I'm not a fan of those movies, but I would say that's 10 times out of 10 the right choice to make, to go see the Spider-Man movie regardless. um
yeah, yeah.
but thank you so much, Don. I guess we can is there anything current going on with any of your old comics that we could, that like, has anything been collected and published or like recent, like, because I like, for
Uh,
example, I know you talked about Dynamite did the hamsters in the mid, like late 2000s. Is there any where can we find any of that great old, like, I mean, besides back issue bins, like, is that stuff been collected? Will it be collected? Especially the hamsters. That's one that I've
uh,
always wanted to like
that's a good
dig into.
question. It's been kind of on hiatus with Dynamite. It was just kind of like a political rift between Dynamite and some creators that I've worked with, and so um, I was supposed to do a hamster cyberfrog crossover a couple of years ago, and unfortunately, the owner of Dynamite and the creator Cyberfrog kind of had a falling out, and we were kind of one of the casualties of that. So I was really looking forward to a full color hamsters book with Dynamite that I myself actually would write. And I actually wrote the script for it. It was like 40 pages, and honestly, it's like one of the best things I ever wrote. And it probably won't see the light of day. But maybe if you're interested, I could send you the script and you
Oh, I'd
could
love to
let
read
me
it.
know
Yeah, if
what you
nothing
think.
else.
Um, so the only things I've been doing, I mean, I had a couple crowd funds over the last uh, year or two, and they were mainly parodies. So we did a X Farce Reloaded, which is a parody. Came out like I think in 2021. So it collects the book that you have, but we completely digitized it all in color.
Oh, cool.
So it's got like 48 pages of both new and old material, but it was never presented in color. So if you like X-Men, this cut basically spoofs everything from the Lee and Kirby origin all the way up to like the most recent, X-Men storyline. So that's on Indiegogo. If you just go to X-Farce, I think it's just xfarce.com. You could kind of check that out. And you're probably a big Keanu Reeves fan, I would imagine. So I I did another parody called Beardzerker, which is basically what if Bill and Ted were in a coma for like 40 years and then they woke up to this era, and it's a kind of a parody of everything Keanu, but mostly his Berserker book that he did with Boom Studios, which I think they're going to animate it and put it on Netflix. But it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek rock and roll parody adventure, and that's on beardzerker.com. I do have another book that I wrote that's going to be coming out, I think probably next year. It's called it's part of a Indiegogo campaign called Thomas Valiant, and it's kind of my take on what if somebody asked me to write like a 1970s Plastic Man type of character. And so that's in the works. I've got a few anthology stories in Alterna Comics. It's called it came out on a Wednesday. I think I have a copy on the shelf here. Oh, here we go, right here. So these are really inexpensive. You can pick these up on Alterna's website. They're only like $2 or $3. But this is kind of like a heavy metal type of book.
No, that was very, yeah, when you're showing me, that's like very heavy metal looking. So
yeah. So there's one story that I did back in my Overload days that not very many people saw. So it actually gets reprinted here. That's the story. But it's a fun anthology. It's got a little bit of everything for people. So I'm still in print, but I'm not I've been kind of taking a break from running my own comic book show. I was doing one like almost twice a week, and I felt I was kind of getting a little bit burnt out. It takes a lot. You know what it's like to try to do a weekly stream, and you edit it, and you got to upload it, and on top of that, you and I are both working like a regular job. So
yeah,
trying to fit in that extra creative work. I'm getting close to being 60, so I don't quite have the energy level that I did when I was younger. So I'm content with that. I mean, there was a part of me that said, I want to go out there, and be the next big thing again. But that happened, and I should be, I'm content with that. I don't feel like I have to prove anything anymore. If I get the muse to write something, I'll definitely give it a shot again. But I think I'm just kind of in a dormant season of writing. But for you, I mean, I think you're in the right place down there in Southern California. Do you have an agent, or do you?
I do not. No. That's kind of like my bit, like my sort of next big question, because I just finished a novel that I wrote recently, and then I have an older one that I've set aside that I'm ready to now publish. I had a friend who was a successful writer. His name was Ned Vizzini, and he was kind of like about 10 years ago, he was helping me get it published or like figure out what to do. And he took his own life. So that's been kind of like a lot of baggage for that story. And that's kind of like been weighing over that. And my writing in general too, it took me a long time to realize that. But writing, working through, like I've written other things along the way, smaller things, but writing that second novel, which is very much like I should send you a copy just to read it. And because it's very heavily inspired by the types of comics that we're talking about. It's about a newspaper delivery boy in the mid 1990s in Pennsylvania who's heavily into comic books and this geeky culture and all this stuff before it was cool. And
I like that.
But he discovers, and it gets the dark side of the story, which is I guess the twist in my brain. He discovers the corpse of a little boy, that something horrible happened to this little boy, and then the little boy proceeds to haunt him throughout the story, and he has to kind of uncover what happened to that little boy. and it deals with like really dark stuff, but it's meant to like use these, you know, bright, colorful worlds to confront that darkness. And so that's kind of what that book is about. But writing that one helped me to sort of process the personal baggage that I had with the other story, which is like a science fiction. I call it a science fiction romantic adventure that I wrote when and then Ned, when he read it and then unfortunately took his own life. And that really weighed a lot on me, feeling of like, because there's this combination of like, you know, I wasn't like Ned's best friend, but I was someone who he was helping. And that like feeling of like guilt that like took me a long time to process, like somehow like this is, I was, you know, I contributed to it. Like, not that it's my fault, but, and now I understand that it wasn't, but at the time I felt like guilt. Like if I didn't ask him for help, he would have been okay. But it took a long time to like work through that, because he's been gone for like a good 10 years. And the even sadder sort of irony or weird twist was he actually happened to end his life on my anniversary. Oh, which is a weird coincidence. So I remember my friend, our mutual friend who called me to tell me that he had taken his life, he calls me at like 11:30 on our anniversary, and I thought, oh, that's cool. He must have realized it's our Judy and my anniversary. And he's like, hey, and he's like, Ned killed himself. And I just remember I just flirted out, I said, it's my anniversary. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Like, just like, I would have called you tomorrow, but it was just, you know, in, you know, the long picture of things, like, it's like, there's been a lot of healing from myself and just understanding that, but that's all a long story to say. I have 2 novels that I'm ready to get in the world. So
they sound really cool. I mean,
it's just sort of like using, you know, not necessarily that specific pain that I'm mentioning connected to my friend Ned, but that kind of idea that these things that are harmful in your life, and that we can, you know, work through them. And I know that through my life, you know, comics like this and these bright, colorful worlds that sometimes are in black and white, I guess, that helped me to, you know, maybe sometimes escape that pain and then learn how to process it. So that's the connection with, you know, some of the books that you were responsible for bringing into the world, I guess. That's
deep, man. That's
my little bit of a thank you. So, and yeah,
that's
if you,
cool.
you should, I'll send you a copy so you can read it. If nothing else, just to see sort of some of the, you know, there's always the question of the legacy of our work in our lives. And I think being a father now has really helped me understand, like, my legacy is really my kids. And as a creator, I want things to be out there for people to read, but it's like those 2 little girls, those are my true legacy. But at the same time, like, you know, that on, you know, different levels, the things we create are connecting with people, you know. So hopefully that my books can do that, as, you know, you just particularly with you know, creating a space where entity could be a thing in the 90s, that I could find Zen comics and then these parody comics that I was reading at the time, when, you know, because, and like you said, really at the time, like magazine and Cracked were like, that was it for parody. So it was like cool to see these other things that existed. So
no one's really carrying the torch anymore. I mean, I feel like Mad isn't like a monthly thing anymore. I've seen like at the drugstore, there's like these collected Mads, and they're usually like collecting movie spoofs.
Yeah,
and they're on
I've seen
they're
those
nicer
lately.
paper. Yeah, nicer paper than the old newsprint. So that's cool, but I don't think they're doing anything really that new. I've actually seen people that have worked for Mad crowdfund their own types of Mad-esque spoofs, like on Indiegogo. I think there's one called Claptrap that a couple of Mad guys did that looks pretty good. But it's unfortunate, kind of that slapstick humor element in comics. I know there's some people out there doing parody, but you know, growing up, to me, I liked a lot of the you know, like the Zucker brothers movies, like Airplane and stuff. But
yeah, cool.
Anyways,
cool. Yeah.
So, hi. Help me, Daddy. Help me open this.
Oh my gosh, this is a tough one. So this is the epitome of being a dad, right? You gotta open hard to open things.
Is that sriracha?
It's a sriracha mayo.
Oh, nice.
So we'll see what it's new. We've never tried this before, so
that sounds good.
Here, Mom, we'll take care of that. There you go. Take that.
Oh,
And so
so
with that,
cute.
I guess we'll wrap up the interview part for
We got
like
upstaged by your daughter.
no, anytime she like I have a friend that does a YouTube channel called Most Extreme Ranking Challenge, and every now and again I'll do videos with him where like you pick your top three of something and then people vote and stuff, and it's like sort of a little bit of a game showy type of thing. And the best episode is where she just like sitting with me the whole time, and she's just like sitting there, and like this is like these their episodes are an hour plus, so she's just a
Aw.
very patient little person. So thank you for watching, anyone out there. Thank you to Don for joining me and sharing about his background in comics and just reflecting on life a little bit and things. And hopefully I'll have more conversations with Don in the future, just for my own sake, because it was just an enjoyable conversation. Whether I record them for the rest of the world or not, it's a separate question, but I appreciate your
It
time
went
talking, Don.
fast.
No,
It
I
went
know
fast,
exactly.
man.
When my wife came in, she's like, I could hear like thinking, oh, she's like, oh, he's still talking. And I'm like, oh, it's 11 already? That
Yeah, I enjoyed it. We have a lot of common interests and the whole USC thing. I didn't see that coming. But yeah, we'll definitely have to trade our writings together, and I'll try to get your address and maybe send you a keynote on a Wednesday. I think you'd dig it.
oh, that looks cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Josiah.